Hello everyone, this is Peak Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have a review of Coming to America, or if you want to name it, Coming to America 2. This is of course the sequel to one of the most favourite and most iconic comedies of the 1980s, Coming to America, which was released in 1988, starring Eddie Murphy of course. This sequel was released on March the 5th on the Amazon Prime service, and we see the return of many of the cast from the original. Obviously this includes Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall retaining their lead roles as the characters Prince Akeem and Semi, and also recreating the many multiple characters that they played within the first movie. We of course have the return of Sherry Headley as Lisa as well, and John Amos, who we all know was the famous owner of the McDowell's restaurant as well. And we get other characters coming back who also had smaller roles within the first film as well. In terms of new characters, we primarily concentrate on Jermaine Fowler as Lavelle, we have Leslie Jones as Lavelle's mother, and we also have Wesley Snipes as General Easy. And this sequel was directed by Craig Brewer. Now the setup here, if you remember from the first film, that the basic premise was that Prince Akeem had to find himself a wife, and he was traditionally had one selected for him, but he wanted somebody to like him for who he was rather than his status as prince. So he travelled to America to find someone that he felt was going to be worthy of him and find himself worthy of her as well. And initially this is when he found Lisa, played by Cheryl Headley, and then they eventually get married and end up ruling Zamunda. So we pick up from that premise where essentially now Prince Akeem is ruling over Zamunda technically because his father is aging, very much welcoming with the return of James L. Jones in a very much of a small role, which you would expect at his age now. But all of a sudden Akeem finds himself under certain threats from the presence of General Easy, played by Wesley Snipes, who wants to basically usurp his rule from Zamunda. After discussing with his father, he also discovers that he has a son who was based in New York, Queens, and this is very much of a funny scene when we discover that Akeem, under the influence of drugs, had an unfortunate one-night stand with Leslie Jones, and as a result he has a son. So he has to locate his son, who can then come back and be the Prince of Zamunda. So that's the basic premise and plots from this, and I think overall, this was a decent and entertaining sequel overall. I think it has the same kind of bright levity, lightheartedness, energy and liveliness of the first film. I think all of the actors involved, whether it's from the previous film or whether in the current film, played their roles, I think, very competently enough. I think in particular we look at, of course, Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall. They still have that very much of a youthful look about them. There was a bit of the aging, and without spoiling, you'll see it in a certain scene, and I think they pulled it off very well. You don't really notice it too much, but apart from that, it is the actors being themselves, and yes, they still got that same tone and spirit that they carried over from the characters that they played within the original. So both of them played their part very well, and I'll also say that a lot of the characters actually from the first film who make cameos also still look very youthful or energetic, and I allude that as well to Sherry Headley as Lisa, who I think had a very good expanded role in this one. I did like in particular the chemistry that she had with Leslie Jones. I liked the kind of bonds that eventually they come together and understanding. I thought that was a nice element to the movie as well, and I think overall the movie has a very positive and bright tone about it. It doesn't want to include itself in any of the pitfalls that we see a lot of these reboots and reinventions, when they try to play too hard, if you like, to certain social issues or identity politics. There's no elements of that in this sequel at all. Some people may allude, as we see, that Akeem has 3 daughters, and there's a bit of a discussion about whether a daughter can be the future ruler of Zamunda, but that's not really played on too much. Like I said before, a lot of this is really in the same kind of entertaining comedic tone as the first movie, and I thought it was a pleasant surprise really. I found it very watchable. There's not really too much I could complain about it. I think one of the stand-up performances was Wesley Snipes as General Easy. He clearly has fun in this role. He's this very kind of wacky, very zany personality on here. He carries a bit of a threat level every time he feels that his own daughter, who has been chosen to marry Prince Lavelle is the marriage coming under threat. So I always like that. But in general, he plays it for laughs as well. And he brought a lot of the energy and charisma in terms of the new cast. I think Jermaine Fowler, who plays Lavelle, it's overall a decent performance. He's an okay character to watch. We learn a bit about his backstory and his own motivations as well. There was a love story introduced throughout the midway point of the movie. I wasn't really as convinced by it as I was the first movie. I think they needed a bit more time and development to really convince me of the love relationship that we see throughout the movie overall. But again, a lot of it was just very harmless. It was very, I think, light on its feet. Very much of a nice tone and nice pace about it overall. I did love also the recreation of the famous iconic scenes from the first movie. In particular, I look at the barbershop scenes as well. That was very good, and particularly when we have the wedding ceremonies and we have various people from the first movie singing the songs as well. And there was a lot of songs throughout this movie as well, some from the past, some from the future. We have a lot of more contemporary artists making cameos, but we also have some artists who from the 80s and 90s eras always making an appearance. I won't spoil it, but yeah, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised if you come from that era, and in particular if you were fond of the first film. It just adds to what I think is overall a very enjoyable and watchable experience. Of course, it's not as funny as the first film in my opinion. The humour was okay. There's nothing too risk, nothing too juvenile, if you like, or adult. This does, of course, have a PG-13 rating, and I know some people may have took some issue with that, but I didn't, because I don't think the R rating that the original had was the main reason why it was so successful and so immensely enjoyable. That wasn't the reason, and so I don't think the PG-13 had too much overall an effect of how watchable this movie was. So overall, yes, I can't really have too many complaints about it. Lots of nice cameos, nice music. I think, you know, this is something you can put on and enjoy. It doesn't run on for too long. I think it's about an hour and 30 minutes or so, or just a bit more over that time as well. So yeah, I think it's just a pleasant surprise and a decent and entertaining effort overall. Of course, like so many of these reboots, the original didn't really warrant a sequel as such, but I think overall this film had its own identity. I think in the first 15-20 minutes, of course, it connects itself as much as it can to the original, but throughout the midway point of the film, it does become its own story. It does focus on the newer characters involved, and I found them to be quite bright and positive personalities overall. So in terms of a sequel to, again, as I mentioned at the start of this review, one of the most iconic comedies, certainly for me growing up, and I think for a lot of generation of people growing up in the 80s, I think this was a decent try, decent effort. I'm not sure a third film is warranted, and there's no, if you like, end credits to hint at a third film, but we'll wait and see in terms of how successful it is on Amazon before we decide whether a third film is really warranted. So if I had to give a score for Coming to America 2, I would give it a 6.9 out of 10. Very bright, very breezy, very easy to watch, very appealing, I think, if you've watched the first film, but also if you haven't watched the first film, you don't need to necessarily watch the original to jump into the sequel. I think it's accessible for both sets of fans as well. So on that aspect, I can commend this effort overall. So those are my thoughts and feelings on review on Coming to America. Let me know what you think in the comments below. How did you think this compared to the original? Did you think it was better? Did you think it was worse? Did you think it was a sequel that was really unwarranted? Did you find it as funny? Did you like all the cameos from artists and actors from the past generations making an appearance as well? Did you think it was too repetitive of the first film and needed to be more original and more innovative? Or were you overall satisfied with the fact that it was a decent sequel to the original? So let me know what you think in the comments below. Please hit and like those subscribe buttons and help me grow the channel and provide more content for you in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.